Dalen and Lord Henley passed by the massive, dull metal statue of Broken that stood resolute in the center of the room against the wall, as they excused themselves from the main hall where the ball was taking place. It was said that the steel of his armor was made from the body of a dead god, which explained its unusual appearance. The actual suit was said to shine like a mirror, while also appearing with a dull, matte gray finish, almost like stone. The lore around gods was almost always confusing and contradicting, which was another reason that Dalen treated such stories with a grain of salt. They passed through a door on the edge of the main hall and into the hallway beyond that leads to the kitchen. On second thought, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Firstly, I don't think we're supposed to be back here. Secondly, what exactly are we supposed to do if we actually find this killer? Dalen asked, growing more nervous the closer they got to the old door in front of them. If it is what you claim, then we don't stand a chance fighting it.
Dalen, there are more ways of handling conflict than simply fighting. Perhaps we can talk with them, discover who sent them, and who it is that they are targeting.
Are you insane?
Possibly, yes.
I seriously doubt that this assassin will be willing to just sit down and have a chat. They reached the door, and Lord Henley reached out for the small brass handle.
Perhaps my eagerness and excitement got the best of me. All right, we will not approach or confront this killer, but it is our duty to the people at this ball to do our best to try and find out who it is. Once we do, we will report it to the warden and their security, all right?
Dalen exhaled a hesitant sigh of relief. All right.
Wonderful,
Lord Henley said gleefully as he pushed open the door and walked straight into the giant Orden house steward.
And just what exactly is it that you think you're doing?
The large woman asked in a growl.
My dear woman, we are on official business of the utmost importance.
And it is my official business to make sure people like you don't go sneaking around where they don't belong.
Do you know who I am?
Lord Henley asked, clearly faking annoyance.
I am Lord Mortimer.
You could be one of the Woden themselves for all I care.
Excuse me, Dalen chimed in, trying to defuse the situation. I'm terribly sorry for all of this, but we believe that everyone at this party is in grave danger.
The only folks in danger right now is you two, if you don't get back to the ballroom by the time I finish counting.
Why, I never...
5.
Lord Henley's protest was cut short by the Orden's gruff voice.
I will have you know.
4.
My lord, I think we should do as she asks, Dalen suggested sheepishly as he watched the brute of a woman begin cracking her knuckles.
3.
Fine. Have it your way,
Henley grumbled.
Smart,
Grimace said as she slammed the door in their faces.
If I had any pride left, I do believe it would be severely damaged after that encounter.
Lord Henley scoffs at the door. Yes, my lord, you are the very picture of humility. Now, we've tried what we could. Perhaps we should return to our table now.
Dalen. Wasn't it you who was just talking about taking more action for our beliefs?
Well, yes, but...
This is action, and we are to be men of action. Do you expect me to give up so easily? I am many things, but a quitter has never been one of them.
They both stood in silence, staring at the door. Lord Henley then turned to another door further up the hall.
Come along, Dalen. We have a mystery to solve.
Dalen sighed reluctantly and then followed his teacher back up the hall. He glanced around at their surroundings, making sure no one could see them, and then they both ducked through the side door. On the other side of this door was a series of connecting halls and corridors, no doubt the staff's quarters and various pantries and storage areas for food and other house amenities. Lord Henley led the way, past one hallway and down another, quietly passing a side door that led back into the kitchen. If Dalen hadn't known better, he would have thought that Lord Henley knew exactly where he was going. But he had claimed to have never been to this particular house, and his own house had a much different floor plan. Lord Henley was a very thorough man, however. Perhaps he simply attempted to learn the floor plan before coming to this event. He did know that there would be an assassin, after all. It would have been wise to note all potential escape routes just in case. Lord Henley stopped in the hallway, holding his hand out in front of Dalen and pressing it against his chest, and then pointing forward to a small red stain trailing out of one of the nearby rooms. Dalen closed his eyes and breathed heavily out, and then began to approach slowly, motioning for his teacher to remain behind. He knew that, unlike himself, Lord Henley was no coward, but Dalen knew his place, and if one of them were to die a horrific and painful death, it would be better that it was Dalen. He tried his best to prevent his hands from shaking where they rested at his side as he crept ever closer to the door. In the back of his mind, Dalen tried to convince himself that the dark red trail was some sort of wine or red sauce that one of the chefs or waiters had spilled, but as he drew closer, that fantasy quickly evaporated. He reached the door and peered into the dark room beyond, where he saw a dark form slumped against the back wall. He motioned his hand in front of a small rune that marked the doorframe, and a dim blue glow began to illuminate the small crystalline fixtures on the wall. Many of the frivolous things these nobles created for themselves Dalen found excessive, but the enchanted lamps that many of the noble houses had begun to install were quite remarkable, and they did an impeccable job of illuminating the horribly morbid and gruesome scene in front of him in a faint blue hue. Dalen's hands stopped shaking. He was far past fear now. This was now something else entirely. He didn't grow up rich, but he was always safe. That illusion of safety he had known all of his life had just been instantly and irrevocably shattered as he looked at the lifeless corpse in front of him. There were deep lacerations all over the man's mostly naked, gray body. At just a glance, he could tell that every ounce of the blood that had once belonged to this man had been drained from his shriveled husk. Trails of that blood still lingered as it dried on his skin and on the stone floor of the washroom. Dalen's shock finally subsided, and he put his hand to his mouth to try to prevent himself from screaming or losing the expensive appetizers he had enjoyed earlier in the night. Lord Henley approached him from behind and laid a hand on Dalen's shoulder, which caused him to start.
It seems we were too late, I'm afraid. It has already begun.
Martonis marched towards the door at the other side of the ballroom floor. Unlike Reaper, he was unable to simply phase through things, and so his walk was considerably slower. Especially after he knocked into a waiter and nearly spilled a year's wages worth of red wine on one of the noble women's bleach-white dresses. He kept his eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. Something wrong was happening here, and not just the usual corruption and backstabbing kind of wrong that usually took place at these events. No, this felt much worse. This was something terrible. Martonis had trained for such things. In fact, training for deadly situations was one of the few things he had done over the 20 years he'd been a keeper.
100,
Reaper shouted from his mind. Right. 100 years. Not to mention the years before that, when he was still working the streets, where something terrible happened pretty much every day, and people like him were the only ones able to fix it. But the only memories of that time came from reading reports, or from stories told to him by others, for he had no memory of them himself. The Ministry of Investigation was rarely considered morally good, but they had a job to do, and they did it with excellence. They didn't have to worry about things such as right and wrong. Their sole purpose was enforcing order. That is what Broken had created them for, and the Keepers were the foremost expression of that order. Before Broken, the idea of binding a Faden was nothing but a fantasy. In fact, most people didn't even believe Faden existed at all, outside of fairy tales used to scare children. But the Faden were real. Very real. Ancient souls from the schism that were eternally trapped within the veil, where their minds and souls were constantly torn apart and put back together wrong, until all that was left was hatred and hunger. Most Faden manifested in the mortal world as terrible plagues or curses that turned good people into something far worse. Reapers were one of the few races of Faden that maintained a semblance of their former minds. Though their memories were gone, their hatred was concentrated towards the other Faden and the Woden that had cursed them to this fate. When Broken first began traveling to the other world in search of knowledge, he began to sense the presence of such creatures in the Vale, and eventually was able to reach out and form a contract with them. He bound their cursed souls to mortal bodies, giving the hosts extraordinary powers and senses and allowing them to be able to see into the veil, making them lethally efficient hunters and detectives. It also gave them extraordinarily long lives, but with long life also comes the madness. The Reapers also benefited greatly from the binding. By being tethered to the mortal world, they would be able to retain memory once again, and they would be allowed to consume the soul of any other Faden they encountered, or any mortal that got in their way. Martonis knew that most of the Empire believed that Keepers and Reapers were merely myths used to enforce order and sow fear. More times than not, however, that underestimation of his kind helped him greatly, though the fear of those that did believe was an equally effective tool. He passed through the staff door and into the corridor beyond, retracing the mental trail that Reaper had left him. He followed the faint glowing red streak that only he could see, until he found himself standing in front of the washroom where two nobles were standing in front of a body.
Well, this just got interesting.
The two nobles started and turned around with frantic looks on their faces.
Normally you two would be my first suspects.
He leaned past them and looked at the desecrated corpse beyond.
But I sincerely doubt either of you could have done that. So, you want to explain why you're contaminating my crime scene?
Good sir, I take it you are part of the event security,
the older and better dressed of the men asked.
Something like that. Now, it would be in everyone's best interests if you start answering my questions.
We, received a tip that there would be an assassination attempt on someone here tonight. We were merely hoping to investigate and discover this killer before anything happened. Unfortunately, we were too late to save this poor man, the younger one said shakily. Martonis turned his head to the side.
What do you think?
The old one smells funny, but I see nothing in the veil. They appear to be honest.
Reaper screamed in Martonis' mind.
And to whom were you just talking to?
Someone you should pray that you never meet. Go back to the ballroom. Notify the event staff. I'll handle things from here.
If you believe that you can just walk in here and take credit for our hard work, you are sorely mistaken, good sir.
Broken steel, I hate nobles.
Excuse me?
You want to be involved? Fine. You're back to being suspects. Let's start with who you are and what exactly you know about this.
Martonis said in a clearly agitated and demanding tone while gesturing to the gory scene beyond.
I am Lord Mortimer Henley, Lord of House Henley, and this is Dalen, my ward.
The one called Dalen proffered an awkward smile.
Continue.
I received an anonymous tip that an assassin would be present, and I have it on good authority that they would somehow be connected to the blood arts.
Martonis pushed past them and began examining the body.
That explains the lacerations and blood loss.
Was it a sanguine? Dalen asked.
No bite marks, only stabs and slashes. Hemomancer, most likely.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
I apologize for my ignorance, but I know very little about hemomancy.
Few people do. Practitioners are rare and extremely powerful. There are 4 different aspects of hemomancy. Most hemomancers are only capable of 1 or 2 of these aspects. This kill proves that the killer was wielding at least 3.
How so?
The first aspect is internal. Nearly all hemomancers learn it. It allows them to manipulate their own blood, to empower their strength, endurance, and senses, as well as heal themselves from most injuries and toxins. The second aspect is external. They can use their blood to fuel spells and incantations, as well as form weapons, armors, and wards. These first 2 aspects drain their soul much faster than other forms of magic due to its nature. The third aspect is also external, but it allows them to manipulate other people's blood once it's outside of their bodies to do the same. They need to draw the blood first, but once they do, they begin to burn that person's soul instead of their own.
And the fourth? Dalen asked.
The rarest and most deadly. Full control of the internal blood of other people.
A confused expression spread across both Lord Henley and Dalen's faces, and then it instantly turned to horror as they realized the implications.
That means that they can kill someone with a thought. cause a heart attack, poison their blood, drain blood from their lungs or brain, cause them to go blind, or cause numerous forms of organ failure. They become death incarnate. Thankfully, few people ever learn this aspect, even fewer ever master it, and none that do ever survive long. If they are so powerful, how come they don't survive? The blood god is a jealous one. He doesn't like competition.
Well then, hopefully we shouldn't have to worry about that, at least. Right?
The Lord asked nervously.
As long as they're wearing a soul governor, they won't be able to use the fourth aspect, even if they are capable. They won't be able to cast spells either, but that won't make them much less dangerous. We need to be...
Martonis was cut off by the sound of a blood-curdling scream from down the hall. Reaper appeared from the shadow on the wall nearby, his endless eyes blazing brightly.
Go,
Martonis said, as it nods its billowing head and darted out into the hallway.